the time that Shakespeare was writing Macbeth, James I, King of Great Britain and Ireland, was sitting on the throne. He was James VI of Scotland. However, before James was Elizabeth I. Elizabeth had ruled for 45 years and had overseen incredible growth in England's place as a player on the world stage. But we need to go back to Elizabeth's dad to really see what's happening here. Elizabeth's dad was Henry VIII, and Henry VIII was a very powerful king. He had taken over the monarchy when his older brother had passed away, and had taken as his first wife his brother Arthur's widow, Catherine of Aragon. That might sound very strange to us, but it really wasn't that uncommon in those days. Catherine was the daughter of the Spanish monarchs, King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, and the marriage had political purposes. And if the marriage didn't go ahead, the English king would have had to return the rather large dowry that came with Catherine.
No!
Like all the other countries in the West at this point, England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales were part of the Western Catholic Church, which had its head in Rome with the Pope. There were also the Eastern and Russian Orthodox churches, which were similar. The Pope at the time was Pope Julius II, and in order to get the marriage between the 18-year-old Henry and 23-year-old Catherine approved, they had to convince the Pope that Catherine's marriage to Arthur had not been consummated. Catherine and Henry had one daughter, Mary. So things got a little tricky when it didn't look like Catherine was going to give Henry the son he wanted so badly. At the same time, Henry became enamoured by Anne Boleyn, one of Queen Catherine's maids. Henry was not known to be a faithful husband and had previously had Anne's sister Mary as his mistress. But Anne was smart. She was not going to submit until he put a ring on it. To do this, Henry had to divorce his wife Catherine, and that's where things got messy. There was a new pope in Rome, Pope Clement VII, and Henry had to appeal once more to Rome to have his marriage annulled. He put a lot of effort into the endeavour, but no matter what, the Pope continued to say no. Hard to claim the marriage had not been consummated when there was a living, breathing child. Because Henry would not take no for an answer, he made a decision that would change the course of Western history forever. He decided that the English crown would no longer recognise the authority of the Pope and Rome. He established the Church of England and made himself the supreme head, which meant he could do pretty much whatever he wanted. The political fallout of this could have been catastrophic, but Henry was a powerful king and he managed to weather it, though not without serious damage to international relations. He wanted to cast aside the daughter of the Spanish monarchs, who were very much still under the authority of Rome, and there were significant leaders in his own country who remained loyal to the Pope. It was at this time that many large homes belonging to Catholic noblemen began to install priest holes. Henry had closed all the convents and monasteries and taken all of their wealth. Catholics could not worship freely. Priest holes were secret compartments in which priests could hide when the house was searched. So Henry got to marry Anne Boleyn, and they had a daughter, Elizabeth. Anne suffered many miscarriages and failed to provide Henry with a son. By this time, Henry had already moved his attention to Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. Once again, Henry had to get rid of a wife. Unfortunately for Anne, the manner of her ascendancy to Queen had displeased a large number of influential people who were more than happy to take part in her downfall. She was accused of being a traitor, and Henry had her beheaded. He married Jane Seymour 10 days after Anne's death. Jane gave Henry the son he wanted, the future Edward VI. However, it was a difficult birth, and Jane died 12 days later from complications. Edward was the last of Henry's 3 children who were in the line of succession. Next, he married Anne of Cleves, but soon became enamoured of Catherine Howard. Anne wisely agreed to a divorce, so was given a generous settlement and was allowed to remain alive. Henry then married the very young Catherine. However, she was believed to have a couple of affairs. It was all very well for Henry to be unfaithful, but certainly not okay for his wife to do the same. She was beheaded. Henry's final wife was Catherine Parr, and she outlived him. Catherine was a wealthy widow and very smart. She kept Henry's interest through her ability to discuss political and religious issues and to gently care for his failing health. She repaired the relationship with Henry's heirs and ensured that Edward, Mary and Elizabeth were kept in the line of succession. When Henry died, his son Edward VI became king. He was only 9 years old at the time and the first English monarch to be raised as a Protestant. Because he was so young, the country was governed by a regency council. It was not a peaceful time for England. There was a war with Scotland, social unrest, and the total renunciation of all things Catholic. The powers and position of the Church of England were expanded. But Edward was not a strong boy, and he died at the age of 15. The Regency Council attempted to put in Lady Jane Grey as Edward's heir. They did this because they didn't want the country being pushed back into Catholicism. However, she was deposed by Mary 9 days after becoming queen. As had been expected, Mary, a staunch Catholic, reversed all of Edward's Protestant reforms. Mary was often referred to as Bloody Mary due to the many heretics and Protestant leaders that she had burned at the stake. Mary was the first Queen Regent of England when she took the throne in 1553. There had been many attempts to arrange politically expedient marriages for Mary. However, none of them came to anything until she married Philip of Spain in 1554. At the age of 37. Fortunately for the Protestants, but not the Catholics, Mary only lived another 4 years and died without an heir. And then came Elizabeth. Elizabeth, by all accounts, was a force of nature, beautiful, lively, and very, very smart. She was absolutely Protestant, and there were several Catholic plots to dethrone her. None came to fruition, but Elizabeth's response to perceived threats was fast and brutal. Despite all attempts to get her married, Elizabeth refused, because in those days, if she had married, her husband would have become king and outranked her. Consequently, she died without an heir. She became the last ruler from the House of Tudor. But Elizabeth had reigned for 45 years, during which she expanded England's wealth and authority. Often she did this by physically removing anyone who may have had a claim to the English throne. One of these was her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, who she imprisoned and then had beheaded. Despite these actions, Elizabeth's reign was more measured than that of her father and sister. She became a very popular queen. Elizabeth enjoyed the arts very much, and that meant that any noble family who sought the Queen's favour also enjoyed the arts very much. It was a good time for actors, writers, painters, and theatre troupes. The arts were at their peak during Elizabethan England. London was seen as the centre of culture and commerce. Artists were highly regarded and seen as leaders in society. Unlike other times, artists had security of income. Financially supporting and employing artists was seen as an expression of power, status, and wealth. And this is the England and the London that Shakespeare began writing in. Life was good. And then Elizabeth died. The person with the greatest claim to the English throne was James VI of Scotland, from the House of Stuart, and thus began the Jacobean years. James was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and remember, Elizabeth had imprisoned and beheaded her because of her claims to the English throne. It was an unsettled time. The English did not know James other than as the King of Scotland. And while James had been raised Protestant, he came from a line of Catholics, including his mother. English Catholics, who had had to hide their faith in the time of Elizabeth, were hopeful that James would be more accommodating. He did ease some rules, but not enough for the most committed Catholics, and once again, there were Catholic plots to remove him from the throne. The best known of these was the failed Gunpowder Plot, organised by Robert Catesby. Its purpose was to blow up the King and Parliament in an effort to end the persecution of Roman Catholics by the English government. Their plan was to replace the country's Protestant government with Catholic leadership. The best known of the conspirators, Guy Fawkes, was discovered in the cellar of the Parliament building with barrels of gunpowder. All the people involved in the plot were executed. So, we have a plot to kill a Scottish king that ends very badly for the perpetrators. James made a trip to Denmark to meet and marry Anne of Denmark, the 14-year-old daughter of the Protestant Danish king. However, the most significant result of James's visit to Denmark was an intense interest in witchcraft and the occult. When storms assailed his ship at one point, it was attributed to witches, and several women were convicted. James himself supervised the torture of women accused of witchery. The threat posed by witches inspired James to pen the tract Demonology, informed by his personal involvement in opposing witchcraft. So, we have a belief that witches can wield their power to destroy a king. Can we see where this is going? Despite initial concerns, the literary arts continued to flourish under James, who was an accomplished writer and poet in his own right. Renaissance poetry and drama are believed to have reached a pinnacle during this time. However, in the early years, no one was really sure about how things would turn out. To maintain security, writers knew that they needed to win the king's approval and support. So, what did Shakespeare do? He wrote a play about what happened to people who kill a Scottish king, and he threw in the witches as the force behind the action. He wrote Macbeth. Shakespeare did a bit of a disservice to the historical Macbeth, who was the Scottish king around about the 10th century. He was known to be a very wise and intelligent king, under whom Scotland prospered for a very long time. But the true story would not have served Shakespeare's purposes. He considered his audience, played to their fears, and included elements that were particularly appealing to them. That is marketing magic.